For Kelly Lang, it's another day of treatment at a clinic near Baltimore for the disease she's been fighting for 13 years.
I have metastatic or stage 4 breast cancer, which is a terminal illness. If I don't die of something else first, this disease will kill me.
Cancer is Lang's biggest battle, but not her only one. She's also lobbying for a new law in Maryland that would allow doctors to prescribe lethal medications to people like her who are terminally ill, so they can end their lives on their own terms.
I've seen some people have a very peaceful end where they are comfortable, and I've seen some people experience a lot of bloating, which can be mildly uncomfortable. But what worries me is I've seen some people in excruciating, uncontrollable pain. I really feel like if I had the option to avoid a week or 3 weeks of excruciating pain, it would be such a comfort to me as I progress in this disease, knowing that I had a little bit of control over something that is otherwise uncontrollable.
Maryland is one of 23 states where so-called death with dignity bills were introduced in 2015. Supporters believe they're gaining momentum now that California has become the 5th and largest state to allow physicians to aid in dying. The proposed laws would mirror what's been legal in Oregon for almost 20 years. More than 1,300 people there have used the law to get a prescription to end their lives. 2/3 of them have taken it. One was Cody Curtis, featured in the award-winning documentary How to Die in Oregon. She was of sound mind, had terminal liver cancer, and 6 months or less to live. In 2009, she took a lethal dose of a sedative and died at home, surrounded by her family. Many doctors are not ready to see what they call physician-assisted suicide legalized in more states.
I think that is a huge problem for patients and for doctors if we introduce into the relationship that we no longer will focus on curing their illness. We will no longer focus on managing their symptoms. We will no longer focus merely on palliation of pain and other problems near the end of life. But we will also, in an almost bait and switch, say, well, if this stuff doesn't work, we're gonna make sure you die.
Public opinion on the issue is shifting, and philosophy professor Sam Kirstein says it may have to do with baby boomers watching their aging parents die and facing their own mortality.
I think that people in this generation have had a lot of control over their lives. They've had a lot of choices that they were able to make, living in relatively good financial circumstances, for example, and that maybe they want choices to have at the end. They want to control how they go out.
More than 2/3 of Americans say doctors should be legally allowed to assist the terminally ill to end their own lives, according to a recent Gallup poll. That's up sharply from just 2 years ago, when about half of Americans approved. Why the change? One woman's story may be partly responsible. Brittany Menard was 29 when she learned she had terminal brain cancer. She moved to Oregon so she could get a prescription to end her own life. And she became an advocate for the Death with Dignity movement, with videos on YouTube getting millions of views.
I chose this for myself. I would never sit here and tell anyone else that they should choose it for them. But my question is, who thinks that they can sit there and tell me that I don't deserve this choice?
If a patient wants to commit suicide, that is not illegal in any of the 50 states. So the legislation isn't needed for that. What the legislation does is include physicians in that patient's suicide and gives legal protections not to the patients, but to the physicians.
Almost all religious groups oppose aid in dying. The Catholic Church is particularly outspoken.
The Church's viewpoint on assisted suicide and euthanasia is that it's never permissible to take a life, an innocent life, for the sake of alleviating suffering. That essentially you're killing a person to remove suffering from their lives.
Father Thomas Petri is academic dean of the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. He fears that new laws will let doctors pressure patients to end their lives.
My bigger fear is that it's going to become very easy for patients themselves to feel morally pressured to do this, to see themselves in those last stages of life as useless, as a burden to their family, as a burden to their loved ones, as a burden to the world. When, as a man of faith, I have to say, on the contrary, it's the sick who show us what it means to suffer well, to suffer beautifully, and who give us the opportunity to care for them as we would care for a suffering Jesus Christ.
One of the few religious faiths to officially support aid in dying is the Unitarian Universalist Church, where Alexa Fraser is a seminarian. For her, the issue is personal.
My dad was a total character, very, very independent, and as part of his independence, he knew how he wanted to die, or at least he knew how he didn't want the last of his days to go.
Alex Fraser had Parkinson's disease. At the age of 90, he tried to kill himself twice before succeeding with a gun. His daughter and her husband found him.
It was horrible. Nobody should have to go through that, least of all the person who's dying.
Fraser is now an outspoken advocate for the Death with Dignity bill in Maryland.
My personal theology is really very simple. It's about kindness. Surely we can be kind to one another. I see nothing kind about somebody being at the end of their life, not getting the choice that they want to make, and in pain and suffering. Don't tell me it's about doctors and pain and palliative care solving every problem. It doesn't.
Both sides in the debate say what they want is death with dignity, but they don't mean the same thing.
There's a sense in which people are said to lose dignity near the end, when they can't take care of themselves, they can't dress themselves, feed themselves, and so forth. Now, on the other side, people also appeal to dignity, but they appeal to a different notion of dignity. For example, a notion that persons have a special worth no matter what happens in their bodies, no matter what control they lose. And on this idea, we might be disrespecting the dignity of persons in helping them die sooner than they otherwise would.
There's not much dignified about cancer. And things often get very messy in every sense of the word at the end. Perhaps this option would bring me some dignity. But I think for me, it's mostly being able to say, I've had enough. This is it. I've had enough. I'm ready.
1, 2, 3, deep breath.
Would Kelly Lang be ready to actually take a toxic dose of medication to end her life? She says she's not sure, and for the time being, asking a doctor to write her a lethal prescription remains against the law in Maryland. For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Deborah Potter in Baltimore, Maryland.